Hey, everybody. So great to have you with me. It's Elysabeth Alfano, and like every week, I am here to bring you all the plant based news. Thanks for being with me today on WCGO. And of course, if you can't belly up to 1590 AM and 95.9 FM, you can always just go to WCGOradio.com or say, Hey, Alexa. How the heck are you? Play me WCGO. I'm so happy that you're with me every week. And like always, I want to break down some news. And I've got some good stuff. Beyond Meat hits Wall Street and just blows them away. Come on, we knew it was happening. They had their earnings report. And let me just give you some stats. And if you like this kind of business stuff, you can always head to my sister podcast, The Plant-Based Business Hour, on iTunes and all podcast platforms, because we do get into the numbers, but these numbers are so fun. I wanted to also do it here today on Awesome Vegans. So blowing Wall Street away. Q2 earnings for Beyond Meat, 113 million in the second quarter. Analysts expected 99, so just putting them in the dust. That was for all of its earnings, but retail only, which of course is booming because people are eating at home and buying stuff from grocery stores. Retail only was 90 million, growing 195% year over year, and that's up from 50 million for Q1. So just really making us proud, like always. Some other fun news that I want you all to know about. Summer is here, obviously, and people are taking the time in August as they have some vacay time to get their lives organized and in shape. So please join me on Saturday, August 8th for my Jumpstart Your Plant-Based Life class. You can go to elizabethalfano.com/recipes, sign up right there. I'm going to work with you this Saturday for 3 hours to get you a personalized menu plan, what to have in your kitchen, what to get out of your kitchen, tricks and tips for making it through the grocery store without buying the wrong stuff, and just some other helpful hints to get you through parties and eating out with friends so that you can always stay plant-based and healthy. So join me Saturday, August 8th, elizabethalfano.com/recipes. And speaking of recipes, not everybody has time to cook. Now, I love to cook, and I have so many heart-healthy recipes, which you're going to see why that's important in today's show. But if you don't have time to cook, I always suggest going to vistro.com. If you put in the code Alfano, ALFANO, you'll get 20% off. What's so great about this is not only do you not have to cook, and not only does everything plant-based come right to your doorstep, but there's a little bit of quantity control, which is always good for me. As you remember from last week's show, quantity control, it's a tricky situation. So vistro.com, put in Alfano as the code, and that's going to help you out on the days that you can't cook. But of course, you can always go to elizabethalfano.com/recipes to get great recipes that are heart healthy and help you in the kitchen, because we all need a little help, which is why I want to bring in my guest today. He is the past president of the American College of Cardiology and the current chief of the Division of Cardiology of Rush Medical Center in Chicago, Dr. Kim Williams. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
We have so much to talk about, but first I want to say thank you for all you do. You truly move the needle for people, the planet, and animals, but primarily for people's health. And I am so deeply grateful for all you do. Thank you. So much to talk about in the plant-based world. But before we get into it, you, of course, have your feet on the ground for coronavirus and how that is affecting the nation. Can you tell us from Chicago Rush Medical Center, how have things been going there?
Things are actually not quite as bad. I just got off the radio with listening to the governor. The number of cases is down. The number of deaths is down in Illinois. The social distancing and masking, which are mandatory in Illinois, actually seems to be working. There's a 2-week quarantine for anyone who comes from a high coronavirus area. That seems to be working. Obviously, it's voluntary. But I think these measures can stem the tide until we can get to a vaccine or some other measure that would sort of knock this for a loop. It would be great if everyone would do the social distancing. And I know it's very difficult and very controversial about schools and young people. And, as a cardiologist, you wonder how much of this you should weigh in on it, but it's going to affect our patients. So I do feel like I need to be knowledgeable in this area. And if they tell me that young children can have 1,000 times more upper respiratory coronavirus levels when they catch it, even though they may not get sick, spread it. You worry about the teachers and the effect that it can have on them. So I certainly agree with Illinois' decision, tough decision, to have school districts really trying to do things remotely for the first part. I know it's really hard on parents. It's really hard on everyone. But the suggestion is there for a real reason. And we're living in a pandemic. Okay, but you asked me about Rush, so I need to talk about that because Rush University really did step up. It's not everyone knows it. Well, more people do now because it was talked about quite a bit and there are newspaper articles about it. But Rush Hospital, which opened in 2012, the newest portion of it, was actually built with some Department of Defense money and state government money in order to have a place in Chicago where biohazards and natural disasters could have, sort of a sanctuary for people. So there's special things. And we may not care about these huge water tanks that are built under the building so it has an independent water supply. But what we do care about for a COVID pandemic is the fact that you could take pretty much anything in the new area, like a recovery room or an endoscopy suite. And instead of doing colonoscopies, in 2 hours, you can turn that into an intensive care unit.
Ah, okay. So if we were to see a huge swing, you guys feel that you'd be ready?
Which we did. So Illinois has been through it. And so when we were surging completely in sort of April, May, June, we actually had 175 intensive care unit beds available. We started off with only 173 ventilators, and then the state got us a few more so we could cover everyone and cover the operating rooms if we needed to. So that means that Rush got really the largest experience in the Chicagoland area of taking care of COVID patients. Fortunately, we have a very academic group, and that's, it's ranked number one clinically in the country as clinical quality. That's a great ranking to have, but it also has to translate into science. And we did a lot of investigations internally, a lot of reading what other folks have done. And so we learned some things like, doing ventilator prone, doing anticoagulation, things that could help people have much better outcomes than what they had in New York or Italy or any of the other places. And so people did pretty well at Rush.
What are you expecting for the fall? Are you expecting big corona numbers? Do you expect to see the hospital full again?
There's so many places now, Elizabeth, where the second wave is worse than the first. That's inside the country as well as outside the country. And so we are really, anticipating that there will be another surge. It wouldn't be fun. Cardiology went in three directions, basically, when we shut down. We had a whole bunch of my faculty that we deployed at home doing televisits, video and telephone. And, you miss the contact, you miss the physical exam, but you can, get the numbers from the patient actually with their own blood pressure cuff, and you can actually manage people. The second group became hospitalists, and, none of us had been hospitalists for quite a while. Once you go into cardiology, you stop doing that sort of thing. But, you work with other hospitalists and you catch up pretty quickly. The third one, which we're a little more used to, is doing intensive care. And so there was a handful of us that they volunteered themselves to me, and I could make a schedule of intensive care cardiologists who would work along with everyone else in the COVID units. Hope we don't have to do that sort of division of labor again, but if we do, we do, because the Rush University will be there.
Well, let's talk about some heart health issues because, if you are not in good health, then your likelihood of getting coronavirus and being deeply affected by this, if not mortally affected by this, is quite high. As I understand it, cardiac disease is America's number one killer. Is that right? Someone dies every 40 seconds?
It's been the number one killer since 1918, which was the last pandemic. There's the flu epidemic that took out 675,000 Americans. So the 600 or so thousand Americans that die from heart disease a year was a little less than that. By 1919, even though that pandemic lasted for 3 years in the United States, by 1919, heart disease was number one again, and ever since. And so my sort of viral epidemiology has always been sort of a sensitive area for me because I actually have the 1918 slides in my talk to talk about how bad heart disease is. Well, now it's relevant because it turns out that every piece of research that's done, you've got a handful of things that are not cardiovascular, such as smokers with pre-existing lung disease, but mainly it's the cardiac risk that puts people in trouble. The obesity, hypertension, diabetes,
Mhm.
high cholesterol. We were sort of shocked 3 weeks ago when it turns out that the blood of people with high cholesterol is a good sort of place for the virus to replenish itself and
Oh,
and it turns out that fat cells are their preferred place to be. They go into the fat cells, they reproduce themselves at will, and then the overweight person or the obese person has much higher viral loads. And like anything, I mean, if you take, you get a little food poisoning, a little staph, a little salmonella versus a big dose, how sick are you going to get? So
right.
happens, you get a thin person who gets exposed to coronavirus, it reproduces itself a little bit, they can spread it to other people, but they're not overwhelmed by the virus. Whereas the obese person, not only are they having such higher levels in the bloodstream, higher levels to attack their own organs, the so-called cytokine storm, where your inflammatory system is actually damaging your organs. It turns out that fat cells have, they're called adipokines because they're called adipocytes. That's a nice way of saying fat cell. And it turns out that those adipokines really add to the cytokine storm that is so difficult, that inflammatory condition that takes out so many people with COVID. So we
Sit tight on that idea because we're going to run to break, but I want to talk about the healthy or not healthy state of America right when we come back. Everybody live on socials, thanks for being with me. You know that I like to pre-tape my radio show, so we're going to get back into it. I hated to interrupt Dr. Williams, painful for me. We're going to get back into it, Dr. Williams, in 4, 3, 2. We're back. Thanks everybody for being with me. Elysabeth Alfano. I want to get right back to my guest, Dr. Kim Williams, the chief at Rush Medical Center here in Chicago. Dr. Williams, thanks as always for being with me. So we were talking about how the coronavirus likes to live in fat cells, and people who are obese have a tougher time if they contract the disease. What else can you tell us about these new findings?
So it's interesting that only the cholesterol was a new finding. The rest of them, we learned that long ago. The CDC put it out in March that if you have diabetes, what does diabetes do? Well, it actually it's occurring in a lot of people who are overweight, so they have more high viral levels, and the diabetes sort of impairs your immune system. We've known that for years, that diabetes are more susceptible to infections in the toe or whatever. It's a tough place to be if your blood sugar is high. Your white cells don't work very well. Now, as it turns out, that that high blood pressure actually puts people in more trouble with coronavirus, and that may be because it actually damages blood vessels. And sure enough, the coronavirus can attack blood vessels and get a so-called vasculitis or inflammation in the blood vessels. You get clotting inside those damaged blood vessels, and a lot of that happens in the lung and contributes to the low oxygen that ends up needing a ventilator. While at the same time, if they get a corona pneumonia, they can actually have all kinds of fluid going on inside the lungs. Really tough position to be in. So the best answer, if those are the 4 things that we could do something about: obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and high cholesterol, change to a whole food plant-based diet.
Singing my song.
Yeah, do it today. And so by next week, you'll be lighter, okay? Your blood sugar will be better, your blood pressure will have come down, and you will have a better shot if you do get exposed. And, at some point, we're all going to be exposed. The question is, what's going to happen when we do? How sick are we going to get? Now, can I talk about the other side just for a moment?
Go ahead. It's your show.
We have a whole lot of people who are plant-based saying that they can't get the disease. And if you look at the basic science of vegan diet, it is true that your immune system is stronger when you do plants. The amount of inflammatory markers in your bloodstream are lower. Your blood pressure, your cholesterol, all of these things are substantially better. But that doesn't mean you can't spread it to somebody else, okay?
Yeah.
So even if we are completely plant-based, and even if you get a coronavirus and feel nothing, or you get a little sniffles, you get a little sore throat, and then it's gone, because you're so healthy. That doesn't mean that for the previous 5.1 days, which is the average time of getting some symptoms, for that length of time, you weren't spreading it to elsewhere. So let's please all do the social distancing, all do the masking. And then I have a request for you.
Sure.
Because you've got a big audience. What I'm trying to get, and I'm asking every plant-based organization to try to help us collect, to sort of crowdsource the data. Does anybody know a vegan who has actually been admitted with coronavirus? I can't find one. They have to be there.
Yes, I do. Actually, after this show, I do know man and his son.
And okay, and then the question, so there's 5 levels to this.
Okay. We're doing a study right here, folks, on the Elysabeth Alfano show.
Well, it's do you get the virus? Of course you do. The question is, do you get sick from it, sick enough to be hospitalized? Okay. And if you're hospitalized, are you put in intensive care? If you're in intensive care, are you get ventilated? And of course, the ventilated population has a mortality rate. So out of those, what level did we get to? You're the first person with those 2 people that you know, are the first person who could tell me that there were plant-based people who actually got hospitalized. Now I want to know the rest. Because if it really is as protective as it seems to be, and we don't like anecdotes, we really want data. And so if it's as protective as it seems to be, then everybody should be doing it. The CDC should know about it.
Well, so my 2 questions for you. First, let me clarify. I know that they contracted it and they were in touch with doctors. I don't know if they were actually ever admitted. I don't know that they needed to be admitted. So I will get back to you on that. But mostly what I'd like to ask you before we have to, gosh darn it, head to break again is, so for a long time as a cardiologist that you can affect heart disease by going on a whole foods plant-based diet for all the reasons you said, lower your heart disease, lower your cholesterol, lower your blood pressure, obesity, et cetera. And now we're seeing with the pandemic, this is even more so as you go to boost your immune system and perhaps even are protected from really having negative fallout from the disease. Is the medical community finally getting the memo? Just a note to people, you can go through 4 years of medical school and not get any nutrition education. So not all doctors are on board. Are they finally getting the memo? Tell me.
Now you understand why I said yes when you asked me to talk.
Yes.
And everyone else, I'm doing 2 or 3 or 5 of these a week if I can, because we need now. But it's also important to get data. That is, in that people say that terrible phrase, in God we trust. Everybody else bring data, and so
Like that.
understand why doctors really want data. They don't want just fly off the handle with hydroxychloroquine and find out later that it actually increases death rate. We want to be evidence-based for our patients. And so let's try to get as many studies as we can. It's hard to I'm going to randomize a bunch of corona patients, plant-based versus not. But we certainly could start with the observation of, we know what happens in terms of obesity and of the risk factors that I've mentioned. What we don't know is direct evidence, somebody going through and collecting, how about your diet? And one of the reasons we're struggling with it is that we are all in a university. We have a huge database, okay? Let me just spring one little thing on you that we've submitted for publication, that race is not a predictor of mortality. It's only when the race is not corrected for the amount of risk. So if you have a population, African American, with more hypertension, diabetes, and obesity, or Hispanic with more central obesity and diabetes, if you don't correct for the effect comorbidities, as we're called, the diseases that the patient has, you come away thinking that this is a disease where Blacks and Hispanics die. It turns out that there's a big database in New Orleans that was published, and our data almost matched it identically. That is, the risk of a Black person dying from it was actually 21% lower down there, and in our place it was 17% lower if you adjust the statistical model for the amount of underlying disease. So what we're saying is it's risk, not race. And if you are worried about it as an African American or Hispanic, change your diet, change it today, get rid of your risk, and then when you get it, you won't be as sick. And I'm still waiting to find out if you're taking it back on those 2 people. I'm still waiting to find a vegan who got admitted to the hospital.
I'm going to follow up with you on that. And after break, I'm also going to follow up with you about a study you did with an African American population in Chicago. So fascinating. We'll be right back after break. Oh, I'm just so grateful that you're here and spreading the news. It's so much to share. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Everybody, I know you've got questions. Super stroke. I am going to get to your question. I promise I am. Here we go. Back on the air. And we're back. Thanks everybody for being with me. I'm Elysabeth Alfano, and I have the very fabulous Dr. Kim Williams with me, Chief of the Cardiology Department at Rush Medical Center. So before we went to break, we were talking about race factors in being sick in general and then being sick specifically with coronavirus. I do want to get to the results of a study that you did on an African-American population that was eating meat and dairy and fried food left and right, and then you took them vegan. I absolutely want to get to those groundbreaking results. But before I do, I have a question from one of my Facebook folks. Super Stroke is asking, are meat alternatives healthier than meat? And you and I have talked about this before when we had an interview. Can you give me your take on that, please?
So I think you can probably safely put them in as a transition diet, that word that we use. They may not be the same as a food plant-based diet. And so what I would do is recommend that everybody, when they're looking at that product and they're thinking this is something that they want to try, take it and flip it over and look at the nutrition content.
Yes.
Number 1, look for the saturated fat. Number 2, look for the amount of sodium. And number 3, if it does apply, and I know it applies to one product and maybe not to others, that heme iron. Heme iron is one of the things that our NIH AARP studies said, along with nitrates and nitrites, increased mortality when it was in meat. Now, it could be that the meat had cholesterol, and so it may be the combination of cholesterol and heme iron, but they adjust their statistical model. They think heme iron is a big deal. So for those who are not aware, iron, when you're eating heme iron, it actually is absorbed faster and it's utilized faster. Unfortunately, that form of iron upsets plaque. So if you have pre-existing plaque or adding to the plaque, it's probably not a good idea to have heme iron.
But do we know, because Impossible Food has a genetically modified heme that comes from plants, so it's not animal heme. Is the jury out on whether plant-based heme is a problem along with animal heme, or is it just animal heme?
Definitely jury would be out. That is,
okay, we don't know.
Anyone would ever try to take a GMO product and compare it to a naturally occurring. But if you break it down by the basic science, is heme iron oxidized iron? The answer is yes, regardless of where it comes from. But and I'm not saying that although people who are worried about the Impossible Burger, they're all wrong. They may be right, they may be wrong, but without a trial with long-term outcomes, you really can't say. On the other hand, you do know that oxidized iron is not as good as reduced iron. And reduced is what you get from plants, by the way. All the spirulina and kale and spinach is giving you an iron that may not be absorbed as fast, true, but it's healthier for you.
So that is so very helpful. In our last conversation that we had, almost a year and a half ago by now, we gave a quick list of comparisons, and I'd like to rattle those off just for my listeners because I do think it's helpful. Meat is going to have cholesterol. Plant-based options won't. Meat is going to have animal heme. Plant-based options won't, except for Impossible, which is going to have plant heme. Meat is going to have saturated fat, and a lot of plant-based items will. It just kind of depends. You got to look for that, but less saturated fat. It depends on that. You got to read your labels, folks.
You got it. Reread the labels. There is one plant-based meat where I think they say that the Burger King Whopper has 13 grams. The Big Mac has 12 grams of saturated fat, and that product had 13. So
yes. So give or take, they're the same on salt. Give or take, they're the same on fat. Give or take, they're the same on protein. Give or take, they're the same on calories. But one doesn't have cholesterol. That's plant-based. Meat does. One has a little bit of fiber, not a whole heck of a lot, but plant-based is going to have some fiber. Meat has none. You take one thing away from this, meat has no fiber. One is going to have heme. One is not, except for the plant-based heme and Impossible. And then meat is going to have TMAO, trimethylene N oxide. pesticide. I don't know why that's bad for us, but that is bad for us. So plant-based won't have that. And then lastly, plant-based isn't going to have antibiotics and hormones. So do you want to live on these things? No. But if you're at a barbecue and everyone's having a burger and you're going to treat yourself, well, then hit up that Beyond Meat.
So if we can add just a few things to it.
Please.
Shout out to my friends at University of Virginia, particularly Dr. Angela Taylor, who actually categorized or characterized the fact that some people actually get an immune response to eating animal products. It's specific to those with a genetic predisposition who get an insect bite. But once it happens, it really makes, every time they eat an animal product, they get an IgE, that's an immune globulin response that really increases the amount of plaque that they build up. So some people are out there not realizing that they're, quote, allergy, and that's why they're getting much more plaque than another person that might even be in their family. Another one is the NEU of G5, which normally the cardiologist doesn't speak about it because it results in cancer. But when you think of the next one would be high sensitivity C-reactive protein. There are people who are doing plant-based rather than animal-based meats. They are not going to get the elevation in C-reactive protein. So the list is actually just growing all the time.
Yes.
Reasons to try and do plant-based as much as possible, if not exclusive.
I love it. Okay. Well, let's get into that. And then, of course, we still have that study I want to talk about. So we're seeing more and more flexitarians. Actually, that's the growing market. The majority of people aren't vegans like you and me. You've been vegan since 2003, so thank you for that. But the majority of folks are really flexitarian. Can you tell us, is it enough to take out the meat some of the time, or for the health benefits, do you really have to get rid of it all completely?
So there's actually a series, and I was going to try to say everyone should go into their search engine and put in TMAO, unless you want to give me a couple minutes to talk about that. But the other one they should do is animal protein, vegetable protein, mortality.
Oh, I'm doing that. I would almost leave this interview and do it. That to me is fascinating.
With the acronym JAMA, JAMA, that's Journal of the American Medical Association, you're actually going to see 3 different articles, one from 2016 with that title, one from 2019, and a third one that was published a few weeks ago. All of them have the same idea. They're different data sets. 2 are from the United States. One is from the Harvard group with nurses and doctors only. One of them is one of our large data sets called the NHANES National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And one of them has got nothing to do with us. It's from Japan. But they all do the same thing. Take this massive amount of data, take how many vegetables or people are doing, how much they're dying, what they're dying from, and then model it for 3%. If you just take 3% of your animal protein away and put vegetable protein instead on a daily basis, what happens? So the best known one was the Harvard Nurses Health Professional Follow-up data. It turns out that if you replace dairy, fish, and poultry, but just 3%, that's a 6% decrease in death rate. And it goes,
wow.
That is, red meat would be, the dairy would be 8%, the red meat improves it more. Eggs are worse than the red meat. Processed red meat is worse than eggs. And so that gradation tells you a couple things, that not all of the animals are the same, number one. Number two, but they all increase your mortality compared to vegetables. Now, that was only 3%.
Wow.
Why not, do even more than that? And so, yes, it's true. Flexitarian, reducitarian, I know those people pretty well. They're really concerned about environment and animal rights, and just wanting to get people to tamp it down by 20%. It would be great. And those are laudable goals, but I would say that that's a beginning. That's not where you want to end up, because you can do so much better.
So every little bit counts, but keep on moving. Don't stay there. You're starting to work out the meat, keep it going. So you start with meatless Mondays. Before you know it, it's meatless Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Before you know it, it's meatless and dairy-free Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and you just keep moving. You only help yourself. And this is the great thing. You help yourself without pills and without going to the doctor. I'm so tired of waiting in line for the doctor who's always running late, et cetera. So it's great. You do all this, you take control back of your life and your health with just vegetables. How beautiful is that? We do have about 2 minutes here. We might have to come back to it after break. Tell me about the study you did in the city of Chicago with an African American population and what your results were.
So we're very fortunate to have some very interested, health-minded pastors and pastoral staffs. And I heard indirectly that some of the Black churches, I grew up in a Black church, Lent was a Catholic thing back when I was a kid. Apparently, it's been adopted widely in Chicago to give up something, and it might have been cigarettes, or it might have been soda pop, or something that they know they really shouldn't be doing, and they just give it up for Lent, and then to go back after Easter. It turns out that we sort of glommed onto that with one of the Southside churches. With the help of their pastoral staff and Dr. Terry Mason, who was our public health commissioner for a while, we actually, were able to ask, and we had loads and loads of volunteers, but we got 50 people to give up animal products for Lent. And we actually sent them food from a company that you mentioned. I never mentioned companies on the air.
Fair enough.
No relationships with industry whatsoever, other than I paid them. We had some wonderful philanthropy to help help these people. And shout out to all of our donors. So we actually spent a fair amount of money getting 50 people 3 meals a day for 5 weeks. So almost the entire duration of Lent. And then we did blood tests before and after. We did the weight and the blood pressure. And it turns out that
Hold on. Don't give the results yet because we have to go to break and I want everyone to stay on the edge of their seats. Right when we come back, it's the Elysabeth Alfano Show. We're going to get the results to this study that happened right here in Chicago. Sit tight, everybody. We'll be right back. I've been waiting for these results. So you and I, since our last conversation, have been talking about this, and I have been waiting for these results on pins and needles. So I can't wait to hear them. We're going to be back in just a second. It's so exciting. And I'll just say to everybody, Dr. Terry Mason, oh, how I love him. He's been on this show and he is also very wonderful. Here we go, folks. And we're back. Okay, I won't even get into it. My name is Elysabeth Alfano, but let's move right on through that because we have to get to Dr. Kim Williams. He's got exciting results from a plant-based study that he did in Chicago with an African-American community. Right before break, you said that you had wonderful donors. You were able to feed 50 people 3 meals a day, all plants for Lent. That's 40 days. They gave up all meat, all dairy. Tell us, how did it go?
Well, first of all, on a practical level, it was very good. Obviously, I'm still not going to say the company's name out loud. You already did. But I can tell you how good they were at making sure that deliveries got there, because that was my big concern. I had used them personally and they were always good. But, when you're talking about something high stakes like a research project, so kudos to them silently. Okay. As it turns out, we lost a number of people who were away for Easter.
Gosh darn it.
Some data points, but we had 44 who actually went before and after, and we could compare all of their results. And there were several critical things, and I could go through every detail, but the bottom line would just be a handful of points. Number one, their diabetes got better, their hypertension got better, their weight went down, an average of 10 pounds. So that's 440 pounds less in that church. We actually measured insulin levels. Insulin is not your friend. Sure, it's how you control diabetes. But when you become insulin resistant, the insulin levels get really high and it creates more plaque. And so it correlates with heart disease development. It turns out the insulin levels dropped 43%. The TMA, which hopefully everyone's going to go and look at. If you're not, I never even say Google. I just did. So search engine. It's if you look at that 4-letter word TMAO, it turns out that dropped 43%. That really is going to change their risk for heart attack, stroke, heart failure, and death. So the bottom line is that the real big takeaway point, and there are several, but if I just got down to one point, it's the fact that African Americans, I'm always talking about how I'm not retiring until heart disease is the number 2 killer. Fine, at some point.
You got your work cut out for you.
Yeah, I do. And so it turns out because it's going up again, okay,
Mm.
while cancer is still going down. And so it turns out that if we could take away our African American excess, which is 21% more death in the African American community from cardiovascular disease, if we could just take that away, that would knock the whole country below cancer. We would be number two. There are a few states where it's number two. Probably not a lot of African Americans in those states. Most countries, it's number two. Most developed countries, it's number two. It's just low income, some middle income, and the United States of America. Where
Oh
it's not.
gosh.
And so, anyway, yes, drum roll. How much of that 21%, if we would project from our risk calculator, I'd show it to you, but I'm on my phone. But everybody should look at the ACC risk calculator, download it, put your numbers in, take it to your next socially distant party. Uncle Joe, what was your blood pressure? And tell them, oh, you have a 17.6% risk. So anyway, when we did that risk before and after changing all those risk factors, blood pressure dropping, LDL cholesterol, and the like, it turns out that we got rid of 19% of the risk of that group.
Wow. In 40 days.
Indeed. Now, the funny part about that is that you could almost eliminate the entire excess African American risk just from the diet. We didn't do an exercise program. We didn't do any mindfulness or any of the other things, just sending them food and asking them not to eat anything else. How well did they do? It was about 93% people who actually, because we said, please don't eat anything else, but if you do, write it down. And so they turned in what they ate. It was 93% compliant.
Wow. And did they stick with it after it?
So that was another little sensitive thing because that was part of the protocol. They signed up to be surveyed afterwards, and we surveyed. And, what do you get? You get about the first third of the population that answers immediately. You know what that means?
Yes.
That they are very
They did it.
changed, and, they're dropping their drugs and everything's going well. And then you get some people who you could coax it out of them, and then some people who never answer. Okay. So the next time I do this, I'm convinced that we have to have coaching. You can't just, that whole thing, what do they say? Give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish.
Yes.
Of course. Okay.
Yes.
We really want to be putting people in the position to not only know and like the food, but to be able to do it for themselves. And so we are going to try to do a phase two. With COVID, I don't know when that's going to be, hopefully sometime in the fall with Dr. Mason. And hopefully we will have a protocol where there's going to be some live coaching.
Well, we don't have too much time left on radio, but we do have time for the podcast. So I hope you'll stay later than the radio show. And everyone who's going to miss out on the rest of it, I hope you'll go to the Awesome Vegans podcast because we're still going to talk with Dr. Kim Williams. But for radio, let's go through it quickly if you can. Give me, so people can take this away and have this be something that they follow at home. What are your top 5 tips to be heart healthy?
So actually, that's very interesting. I would say the most important thing to do is to know your numbers. Okay? Your numbers will actually motivate you. Okay. You want your blood pressure to be less than 130 systolic. You want your LDL to be less than 100. Unless you have disease, then it's less than 55. No one should be smoking. Okay. Everyone should be exercising, and you have to know, do you have disease? Then it's 300 minutes a week. If you don't have disease and it's just prevention, then it's 150 minutes a week
of exercise.
And the dynamic or resistance or isometric resistance, all of them count. Okay. We want to get down to your ideal body weight. You can look it up at the table so you won't yell at me when you find out what that number is. But I can just say on the air, that it's about 100 pounds for a woman for the first 5 feet, and then 5 pounds per inch. Okay.
Yeah, not thrilled. Okay.
So as it turns out, if we're paying attention to the weight, we know what our cholesterol is. We know that you are not in the diabetic range, and if we are, we're doing dramatic things to lose the central obesity that makes insulin resistance. If we are doing those things, we're going to have a much better outcome.
Okay, so you are talking about whole food plant-based diet, trying to get rid of the things that are making you sick. So you want to know your numbers first. Once you know if you have obesity or heart disease or high blood pressure, et cetera, high cholesterol, you can address this with a plant-based diet. You can address it with exercise. And what am I missing?
So actually, um, well, you asked for five, but there's actually seven.
Okay, go ahead. Give me seven. We got a minute. Not even. Quick.
It's Life Simple 7. Everyone can look it up. It's from the American Heart Association. It's not smoking, not being diabetic, normal blood pressure, normal cholesterol, exercising every day, not being overweight, which is really important, and medication adherence if you're on any medication.
Okay. And you cannot be on medication if you just stick to a whole food plant-based diet. I oversimplify, but not too much, really. I hate to do this because we're going to have to go for the radio show, but everyone, you are missing out on what we're going to talk about next. So I hope that you'll go to the Awesome Vegans podcast because I'm going to stick around with Dr. Kim Williams. I want to thank everybody for being with me every week on radio. It's always so fun to have you. Of course, if you want heart healthy recipes, go to ElisabethAlfano.com/recipes and you can find more about this conversation on the Awesome Vegans podcast. I will see you next week, everybody, and thanks for being vegan. Everybody on socials, thanks for staying with me because I want to get back to more with Dr. Williams. Okay, so we know our marching orders. We're going to get our numbers in shape. And then our bodies will be in shape. And that will give us the quality of life that we're looking for. Because ultimately, that's what we're talking about. You don't want a life of pills. You want a life of great quality. Thank you for those heart healthy tips. Let me go to a question that you and I have talked about this before, but I just want everyone to hear it. You have been quoted several times as saying it is your patriotic duty to go vegan. What do you mean by this?
So this was before the pandemic, of course. I had the privilege of serving on the Medicare Ambulatory Payment Advisory Committee, which is the Hospital Outpatient Prospective Payment System, the HOPS, all of those fancy meanings that they rely on physicians and nurses to come to Medicare, 7500 Security Boulevard, and actually sit with them, listen to the data of what they're spending money on, listen to the proposals of what people want them to spend money on and help them decide whether it's worth the expenditure. Why do they have to go through all that? Because it's a tax-based system that has finite capabilities and you can't cover everything for everybody to a high level. And so that experience really changed my attitude about Medicare. Most physicians think that, it's just random and, hurtful. It's completely not true. They're brilliant people who are dedicated and they are up at night trying to figure out how do you take care of a population with a fixed pie and people bent on destruction, sitting around on a sofa, drinking soda pop, knowing that it's not good for them, but doing it anyway, thinking that, well, they've got a backup system, which is Medicare. So what I was really trying to get across, and I've actually been saying it for years, and then I think a year and a half ago was when the Medicare trustees admitted that Medicare Trust Fund would be broke in 2026. And then a few months ago, they tried to model out what would happen. This was before the pandemic. They actually said that meant physician fees would go down by 30%. Well, that's a huge, if you already have a physician workforce that's overworked, and you could say that we're not all underpaid, some are, some aren't, but there's nobody who's, very few people are perfectly happy with what they do. And at least decent compensation makes it a little better, because I have to tell you that it used to be that the leading profession for suicide was military. Now it's physician. And for several years. And so taking what we do and then saying you're going to take a 30% cut, I can imagine there would be chaos. It would be people leaving the Medicare, leaving patients high and dry. So this whole system will crash if people don't decide that it's their personal responsibility. Okay. Sure, I turned 65 and I have my own insurance, but I haven't used any of it. Okay. It's my job for my family, for my kids, my grandkids, to not use up resources of my own for healthcare or the country's. Am I that strong enough? Have some personal responsibility and take it upon yourself to be healthy. not only will you enjoy your life, a longer life, but you're doing something that's good for, the environment and the wealth of your family. You're not taking up with illness.
Yes, I love that you say this. And it's also very empowering. You know, when you take back control of your health and you don't farm it out to, oh, I think the government's got it handled for me. Believe me, folks, they do not. They do not have your best interest necessarily at heart. I'm not saying that Medicare doesn't. I'm just saying in general, don't farm out the quality of your life to somebody else and just hope that it works out. When you take back control, it's so very, very empowering. So thank you for that. The long and short of it is Medicare is going to run out of money because we're all so permanently sick all the time. And you can't take care of a sick population that continues to grow with a budget that continues to decrease all the time. The numbers are running in the wrong direction. So can you give us a prediction for what you see the health of our country becoming in, let's say, the next 5 years? Are we going in the right direction, or are we permanently stuck in the wrong direction?
Well, so there's some very unfortunate things that are going on right now, obviously. But we had a long discussion earlier about the heart disease risk factors and how that is increasing coronavirus mortality. And it turns out that if you take 150,000 people, more than that now, Americans who are now deceased, some of them would have taken up Medicare resources. And so you can say that, they've sort of sacrificed themselves early. But then again, I have not seen the bottom line from Medicare because a lot of our older people are in trouble with coronavirus. And so Medicare is paying for some of the hospitalizations, not all. And then there were the Medicare bailouts of trying to get money in the hands of hospitals that are taking care of COVID patients. So I don't think there's any way right now to even assess as an interim of what they've spent so far and what they're going to spend, if everybody has a second surge and everybody's not careful. So I wish I could tell you what's going to happen. Clearly, no one knows. Everyone says that, we're building the plane while we're flying it and it's full.
Yeah. Gosh, that's a perfect analogy. My.
Yeah, it's pretty much true. And so I think it's going to be hard to predict, but I do think that we're going to have, more congressional money going toward Medicare to help our system out. One of the sidelights that people don't know very often, unless they just read everything they can on coronavirus, everybody is familiar with the lower respiratory system. They're not as familiar with the fact that it likes the male testes, which is why male outcomes are worse than women's. But it also targets kidneys. And so a few of those patients who survived ended up on renal replacement therapy. That's a fancy word for dialysis. Everybody knows it, but the moment you're on dialysis, you automatically qualify for Medicare, regardless of your age. You don't have to be, 5. And so, you could just imagine all the factors.
Yes.
Only one that's good for Medicare is people dying, which is terrible.
Weird.
Here at Rush, the number of people who are ventilated and die is very small compared to, initially in New York where it was over 80%. So Rush isn't helping Medicare because we're keeping people alive. So it's really tough to model that. So I would tell you all the factors, but I can't tell you other than it looks like, a little bit of gloom and doom. Let's take our own personal responsibility and try to fix this.
So we're back to taking our health into our own hands, which, oh gosh, makes so much sense. Let me sort of ask the same question, but in a different way. I mean, it's a very different question, but it looks to the past that might also then end up predicting the future. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now, beyond the fact that, you wish you could have predicted a coronavirus or something? And of course, many did in the World Health Organization. I mean, plant-based folks have been seeing pandemics for a while. And of course, there are many, meat-borne pandemics come from eating meat. So, Ebola and SARS, and there are other meat-borne pandemics. But the pandemic issue aside, what do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
So that's a very interesting question. I would have to start more recently, and then I'll sort of work my way back. Just a handful of things. One would definitely be that if you could get we had a presidential administration that had the advisors that said This is something that happens periodically. We expect it to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and we're putting together a workforce. Now, people can make all the criticisms of the new administration that they want for tearing that apart. But if they knew that was going to happen, if there were advisors enough around, maybe we wouldn't have gotten caught with our lungs down. So
literally, yes.
And so that would be one thing, is to have everyone, World Health Organization, have everyone emphasize how important it is to be ready. Now, Dr. Fauci actually did say the words, shut those live animal markets down, please.
He did. And by live animal market here, we mean American slaughterhouses. They are, yes, go ahead.
He was actually referring to the ones, I've seen them in Vietnam. I've not been to one in China, where you actually have live animals that can make sort of a zoonosis, which is what you call a disease that goes from an animal to a human, because they're there and they're exposed to each other in an unnatural way.
Mm-hmm.
And they're killed and eaten or whatever. And if you can imagine what would if they shut those down and then did what you just said, which is to shut down, the meat plants where so many of those chicken places, they spread the virus throughout each other. It wasn't about so much the chicken or the meat packing places as the impossibility of social distancing and the like. But if we got rid of those, that would be really spectacular. And so a vegan world would not be suffering from this pandemic. There might be something else, but not this one.
I just do want to riff on that, the idea of social distancing. So humans make up about 7 billion people. We slaughter about 70 billion animals a year. I'm not even including fish. Those 70 billion, they eat, they breathe, and they take in air and exhale and eat and defecate. And so they are living right on top of each other, nose to nose. So 90% of the living beings in the world are not social distancing because we are forcing them to not social distance. I don't know how you ever outrun a pandemic if 90% of the population isn't social distancing. Right. So it's disconcerting when you have anti-social distancing in all these factory farms, and it makes it impossible, I think, to outrun a pandemic.
So, well, I mean, your point is well taken. It's just that this particular one is, bats, maybe pigs, definitely humans. So the cows who are living next to each other, but, you could just go to a different disease. It would be a mad cow disease in Great Britain 20 years ago. The closeness of all those cows, they all spread it to each other.
Yeah, avian bird flu, et cetera. So, yeah.
So let's try and be smart about this one. Make sure that we're doing all the masking and distancing. Smart thing to do.
Yes, and get yourself healthy so you can boost your immune system. That means lots of fruits and veggies for you so that you yourself in your own little world, you can make sure that you skate through this, you and your family, and then ultimately the whole planet. Because if we all did this, it would be great. You skate through with as few problems as possible. So I know that your time is short today, and I do have a couple quick exit questions for you. So you are so busy. Let's say you're running around the hallways of Rush Medical Center. You don't have time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
So I actually do nuts. I know that there are people who are anti-nuts out there, and then there are people pro-nuts, and you'll see sometimes that's got a little nuts between them. As the journal editor for International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention, I can tell you we were kind of like in the middle because we were getting publications from both sides, but they're peer reviewed and they actually came out and had some science. And what I'm convinced is that probably what's happened is that they're both right and they're talking about different people. I am definitely one of those people where nuts are dangerous. Oh. Exactly the opposite reason that people think. There's good literature to say that nuts can suppress your appetite. And so if I'm really stuck, I always take them with me. Here they are. This is from my clinic. This is hazelnuts. Okay. But I know that if I take a handful of those nuts to get through clinic, I'm not eating because it suppresses my appetite. And then I look at my weight and it's gone. So if anyone knows how to keep a vegan from losing weight, it'd be great.
I'll cook for you. I think that would be the answer there. Okay, a couple more quickie questions. So you've been working a really long day. You get home. What's the one meal you can make? It's always fantastic. You always look forward to it. Super fast, 10 minutes. What is it?
Oh my gosh, you're going to make me name that company after all.
Again. Okay. Well, does it start with a B or does it start with an I?
Uh, uh, you mean, well, if I did that, then I'd be identifying the company, but I can say that very convenient.
Okay, okay. That shall not be named exactly. We'll move right on. Okay, what is the one thing we are always going to find in your fridge?
There you go.
The same thing. Oh my God! Wow, you're a dedicated fan.
Oh, I do have a lot of it in my freezer. I tend to do a lot of salads and a lot of vegan pizzas.
Me too.
Easy do. I used to take another brand that you can find in most grocery stores, vegan pizzas, a low amount of refined flour, a lot of vegan cheese, and put a lot of vegetables on it, and it comes out pretty good, and it comes out pretty fast.
Yes, I love how you roll. I wish I had more time to spend with you, Dr. Kim Williams, Chief of the Cardiology Department at Rush Medical Center. I am so grateful for all that you do. Dr. Williams, do not go away. Everybody else, thanks for being with me. Of course, share this. This is great information for people as they try to get their lives back on track. Please share this interview or share the podcast, the Awesome Vegans podcast. I want to thank everybody. I will see you all on Thursday for the Plant-Based Business Hour. Dr. Kim Williams, sit tight. Everybody else, thanks for being vegan.